Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It worked today. Everything was fine. Thursday, January 19th, 2023. Mark it on your calendars. The day the buttons all worked just fine. That's good news. All right. What other news? High schooler into school early today. Got a ride to school, so all's well. Ride from production staff. Thanks for taking care of that one. So, all right, no worries today. So, therefore, a perfect show, presumably, or, I guess if you're superstitious, all the other shows that are so fantastic and perfect all started with a rush and a flurry of activity, and now we don't have one behind us. So, who knows how it will impact the quality of today's show. Those of you tuning in to find out that there's no more George Santos news at long last will unfortunately be disappointed. There is more. Plus, of course, his denials of that news. So, everyone can trust him. So, I guess it's all fake. Anyway, yeah, the show goes on, and by which I mean the George Santos show. And I'm getting to the point where I'm guessing this is like one of the high schoolers' math problems, where we're talking about things approaching limits. I don't know whether he's actually doing those anymore. That may be like 8th grade math at this stage of the game. I don't know. There's not a great deal of room left on the absurdity scale for what's happening with George Santos. Two developments. Let me just get them out of the way, I guess. Two developments. One, that there was, of course, originally the claim that was changed along the way. One, I guess, way back in the George Santos history was, oh my goodness, I understand terrorism because my mother was killed in the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, which then became, well, my mother died as a result of the attacks of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. That is, she was in the tower and she died later of cancer, which I guess was meant to imply that she was like among the people rescued from the rubble who may have been, exposed to tremendous amounts of dust and asbestos and got cancer from that. And that's a real thing, and it happened, just not to George Santos's mother. Because, as it turns out, one, she died in 2016, which, even under the circumstances as described, would be difficult to connect to 9/11, but I guess it's doable. But it's a lot harder when, for instance, it is established through immigration records and passport documents, etc., that George Santos's mother was not even in this country on 9/11. Now, you could have died as a result of the 9/11 attacks because you were a member of the Taliban or presumably or Al-Qaeda who had hijacked the planes. They died, but no, that wasn't her fate either. She had nothing to do with 9/11 whatsoever. She wasn't in the South Tower, wasn't in any tower, wasn't in New York, wasn't in the country. Just a pure fabrication. And I don't know that he's denied that one yet. But the one he's denying today is the one that would actually, I guess, presumably, who knows, doom him among Republicans. None of this other stuff dooms him among Republicans. But because Republicans have invested so much, of course, in insisting that drag performers are everything under the sun that they detest, including, of course, their fake claims that they're somehow connected to grooming of children for sexual abuse, et cetera, as outlandish as it is. You wouldn't want to be a part of a party that does that and to lend your support to that party enthusiastically if you too had been a drag performer, as is the latest allegation that in Brazil that he performed in drag under a stage name that escapes me at the moment, and it's not that important that we bring it up, but there it is. I guess that'd be like, I suppose, one of the ultimate accusations you could make against him. The only one I could come up with that was even more outrageous, that it was really him wearing a Stormy Daniels mask that fateful day in Tahoe. But, that's an unusual one, I guess. That I don't expect that one to come up, but it's getting into that territory. Anyway, as I said, he denies it, and even if it were true, I guess it's not the most spectacular news in the world. But think of it as a guilty pleasure, like a soap opera, which is pretty much what it is. Keeping up with what he's being accused of and how crazy it can get, and it's a fun pastime. But now that time is past. Having passed it with our pastime. You see how that works, language. Greg Dworkin is here with mostly regular news and stuff like that. And,
mostly.
But there might also be some garbage. So how you doing, Greg?
Well, we definitely got garbage.
Awesome.
It seems to be pretty clear,
Junk
as
food
Bill
is
Scher
fun.
pointed out tangentially, that he performed as Gloria Gaynor, Oh, no, not I will survive. I mean, that's what he's doing.
Is that, okay. Well, that's a popular one, and it's a good song, too.
Brian Metzger points out, because Santos actually took to Twitter to deny it, which he doesn't usually do for all of his stories.
Oh, okay, I see.
And Brian Metzger said,
different.
say what you will, he knows which revelations could hurt his standing with his GOP colleagues and which ones won't. It may not hurt him with Rudy Giuliani, but as you point out, they've made a whole thing about Drag Queen Hour and how you have to attack and blow up libraries if they do that and stuff like that. And stuff like that there. So it's very difficult for them to back away from this one. He's
we'll
really, what
what
happened is that Kevin McCarthy appointed him to the small F and Deal committee. And
Yes.
he's really trying to work his way up to the big F and Deal committee, because in the last couple of days, he's basically attacked puppies and then said to Republicans, it's okay if you're a drag queen.
Well, if he could bring some along with him, that would be okay.
Good.
If I felt like he would convert them. Yeah. Well, it's a spectacular scene, what's going on here. And of course, at bottom, all you can really take away from it is, yes, Republicans will excuse anything to hold on to power. And all right, we kind of knew
pretty
that.
Much, 4 votes. Everything comes down to 4 votes.
Yeah.
Although, there may be
closer.
less because, things happen and you can't always keep your majority. So we'll see.
Right. I got a story about that.
The big stuff's coming up, which is to say the debt ceiling. We'll have more to say about that. But I had to tell you this, a very important story that was breaking yesterday out of Boone, North Carolina.
Oh, my. What?
There was a police chase involving a John Deere tractor. It lasted for more than an hour, and it topped out at 20 miles an hour.
You can't usually get away on those. Oh,
That's
awesome.
There's
All
video.
right. And this wasn't O.J. Simpson.
No, the tractor hit 2 vehicles. It pushed a dumpster into a church.
Wow.
They shot out a tire, but that didn't work. And then the guy jumped off the tractor wielding a knife, but was brought down by tasers because, these things are important.
All right. Well, that's...
And nobody really got hurt as far as I can tell, so it's a fun story.
The tire got hurt.
Yeah.
Well,
just, rural areas are fun. I'm reminded one time I was on my way, this is some 15 years ago or so, I was on my way through Maine to get to Mount Desert Island for vacation. And we were traveling on July 4th, and so we happened to go through Augusta, the capital, and there was a July 4th parade, which was John Deere tractors. And so what they do is they sit on the tractor and they throw candy out to the kids, which is great. But the speed of the tractor meant that the parade lasted around 2.5 hours.
Right, and the same kid
for
kept
the
getting
5
hit with candy. That's
and the one kid got scooped up all the candy.
Move on.
But you couldn't
get out of here.
Cross the you had to sit there and wait for it to be over before you can go.
Well,
so I feel for the people in Boone. The people watching this weren't just watching it; they were trying to cross the street, and it took a while.
I'm trying to get to work. Can we get this chase over with, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. That is exciting news. And I guess, you go to a police chase with the vehicle you have, not the vehicle you may want or wish to have at some future date.
Right. We talked about this on the show yesterday, so I was glad to see a Vox-plainer on it. What's up with the price of eggs besides the price of eggs? And the eggs are expensive because the chickens are sick.
Right.
They're getting better. They're repopulating the flock, so the price of eggs is coming down. But just keep in mind that the weather is soon to get warmer. When the weather gets warmer, birds migrate. When birds migrate, they bring bird flu with them.
Oh.
they mix
Thanks
and
for bringing
match,
it
and
back.
so we'll see what happens.
Wouldn't the chicken population repopulate faster if they didn't sell us all their eggs?
Well, a lot of the eggs they sell us are for vaccines.
Oh, well, then
That's
I guess
another
it's
thing
a
that
good
pushes up the
trade-off.
price of eggs.
I suppose.
Like you need them. You can't just stop buying
I
them.
didn't realize that was the case. Although I think
Most of the eggs in
said it
Connecticut
before.
go for vaccines.
Well,
That's how they make flu vaccines.
That's
For
very
now.
interesting.
For now,
So a very healthy,
with this new
progressive
mRNA
eggs
stuff, maybe
they
that won't be
believe
the
in
case.
vaccines.
Maybe the price of eggs will drop.
Yeah. I hope they don't use bacon for these mRNA productions. Otherwise,
Well, if they did, everybody would take it.
that's true.
Except
It probably
for
would work
religious
very
Jews.
well. Right. Yeah, it might make people happier. And people
I don't
who
know
are
if they work
vaccine
any better, but they taste
resistors.
better.
Yeah. And you can make the bacon with machine guns, and even Ted Cruz will take the vaccine
Right.
now. All right.
Let's see. Here's another one. Gas stoves can harm your health. Scientists have known it for years.
Apparently.
And the point is that scientists have known it for years. None of this is new.
Yes. I'm making strides towards. I'm convincing people at home that we should replace with the new induction electric stoves that apparently work very well.
There's 50 years worth of literature on it. So, yeah.
Well, that
Go
ought
with
to
the
help.
induction stove and tell us how much it costs.
Okay. I mean, I
And
don't know
because
if I'm
there's
gonna get
nothing
to
we
that,
like
but-
more than having the workmen come on Kagro in the morning
Yes.
and
Clunk,
bang around and
bang.
do stuff while we're on the
Yes.
the
Well,
podcaster.
my intermediate step is my chief use of the gas burner is for the tea I keep talking about. So I got an electric kettle, so I'm using it less now.
Oh,
the
good.
stove. So
Good,
that's
good,
my my intermediate step. Though I understand they leak even when you're not using them. So, all right, that's next.
All right. And
next show
in
with the
terms
windows
of
open.
short stuff,
Yes.
here is Trump chiding one-time evangelical supporters who haven't endorsed him. Remember, I told you Bob Smentana is one of my favorite reporters in the religious news circuit, and Jack Jenkins is the other. So this is a Jack Jenkins story. There's great disloyalty in the world of politics, and that's a sign of disloyalty, Trump said. So he's turning on the
he's right.
people who brung him there, which is really kind of interesting.
Okay, that's good fight. I hope it happens
so
soon.
we
and
enjoyed that
there's
one.
a lot
But
of
let's get down
injuries.
to some real. Let's do some international news.
Okay.
Haven't done that in a while.
Ah.
So, Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah.
Is stepping down as New Zealand's leader.
Right.
A global liberal icon who's faced rising political headwinds at home will leave office by February 7, she said. She said she just doesn't have anything left in the tank. The thing is that one of very popular, however, she's still feeling backlash from the decision to try to keep COVID completely out of New Zealand. That didn't work.
Okay.
The party has since fallen sharply in the polls amid economic troubles and some highly publicized instances of violent crime. So I don't know if it's violent crime. I mean, there was a big shooting, of course, that during her tenure. But she's an international celebrity, very popular around the world. Her response in 2019 to the massacre of 51 people at two mosques in Christchurch solidified her image as a hero of the global left. With kindness and with diversity and compassion. But economic headwinds based on still trying to recover from COVID is a big deal. I mean, China's having this issue. New Zealand's having this issue. You can't shut it down and try to avoid everything. You can't ignore it like the U.S. does. None of that works. So nobody's really come up with the perfect solution for how you deal with COVID. Being realistic is politically untenable, apparently.
Okay. Well.
Which is really too bad.
Political
But, sometimes being honest, honesty is the best policy, except if you want to get reelected, I guess.
I guess so. Or you're talking about being a drag performer.
She's Labor's number one political asset, says a political commentator and former press secretary Ben Thomas. It would be very much a personal decision to step down as opposed to a considered strategy about what would be best for Labor. They spell Labor with that extra U in it.
Yes. It's not you without Labor.
And there's
something
no
like that. Not Labor without
obvious
you.
successor, so that'll be interesting.
Okay.
And then this news analysis in the New York Times, how COVID's bitter divisions tarnished a liberal icon in a part of the world where coronavirus restrictions lingered. Jacinda Ardern struggled to get beyond her association with pandemic policy.
Yeah, but you
Interestingly,
did a great job with it, so.
It didn't in the end wind up hurting the Michigan governor.
Yeah.
Gretchen
although-
Whitmer was taken to task for telling everybody that you have to stay home, and then she went out.
Yes.
And we thought
Oh,
it would
right,
actually
yeah.
hurt her in the election, and it didn't,
I guess
because
they
people
were.
cared a lot more about Roe v. Wade than they did.
Oh, yeah, that or that she was, targeted for kidnapping.
Yeah, people cared about that too on both sides.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, not everybody got.
So it's a reminder
trouble
what
for that.
New Zealand did. The country's initial goal was audacious. Ms. Ardern and a handful of prominent epidemiologists who were advising the government held out hope for eliminating the virus and keeping it entirely out of New Zealand. In early 2020,
not?
she helped coax the country, our team of 5 million, she said, to go along with shuttered international borders, a lockdown so severe that retrieving a lost cricket ball from a neighbor's yard was banned.
Well,
When
that
new,
should
more
happen anyway.
transmissible variants made that impossible, the team pivoted but struggled to get vaccines quickly. Strict vaccination mandates then kept people from activities like work, eating out, getting haircuts.
Yeah, I remember.
Many
all
New
that. We
Zealanders
had
were
it.
surprised by what they saw as her willingness to pit the vaccinated against the unvaccinated. The disillusionment around the vaccine mandates was important, said Dr. Thornley, an epidemiologist at the University of Auckland and a frequent and controversial critic of the government's response. The creation of a two-class society and the predictions didn't come out as they were meant to be or they were forecast to be, that was a turning point. So then it all became about vaccine mandates. And you really have to be very careful and very clear about that. Closing schools and mandating vaccines is always going to be fraught. Sometimes you have to, but you have to be clear about what you're doing and why. The fact that anti-vaccination groups don't like what you're doing, that's not a reason to stop doing what you're doing.
Right.
But you got to be clear from the beginning about what you're doing and why.
Okay, I
Okay,
will.
and if you can't say, well, everybody has to be vaccinated because that's how we keep it out of the country. You can't keep it out of the country.
No, that was perhaps a little wishful thinking, but you can. If you're in the middle of the ocean, you can do a slightly
delay
better
it,
job
but
of this. Yes.
it's what if the rest of the world catches it? You're going to be an island forever and not
Well,
let
they are
anybody
going to
around.
be
I
an
mean, it
island
doesn't
forever.
work that way.
No, it doesn't turn out to work that way. But yeah, you can do your best to mitigate things and keep the numbers down. And why sign up for getting it earlier than you have to, and prepare your hospitals. And I assume that was
But we're
the idea.
partly to blame because we're really good at exporting our stupid ideas. The tension escalated last February, inspired in part by protests in the U.S. and Canada. Remember the Ottawa people? A crowd of protesters camped on the Parliament grounds in Wellington for more than 3 weeks, pitching tents and using parked cars to block traffic. The scene shocked the
but it's an
nation,
island.
unaccustomed to such violence. Some blamed demonstrators, other police and government, and it was a dark day in New Zealand history. So, I'm not taking the side of the anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, me neither.
You have to be realistic and understand that there's going to be blowback and be ready for it. And, it's interesting because Biden has taken the approach of, I'm not going to do what's really best for science, even though I'm going to say it's all based on the science. I'm actually going to try to mix a little science and politics and try to come up with the best Goldilocks solution. And maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. But we don't have the same kind of blowback. As bad as, it is, we don't have the same kind of blowback as, let's say, they're getting in China or in New Zealand.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
I
that's
don't know
just
what
a
to say
political
about New
fact.
Zealand. Okay. Sure. But we'll miss her nonetheless. I thought she was a
No,
very
she's
interesting
great,
figure.
and I
to
just
say
hope
least.
the Finland
Right.
Prime Minister doesn't resign.
I hope that's the case, and I hope that she can leave behind a legacy of fruitful trade between the two countries.
Well, one Prime Minister I would like to see resign is Benjamin Netanyahu, so our next
Sure.
country on our list to talk about is Israel.
That's the one where he lives.
Bombshell ruling by Israel's top court disqualifies Netanyahu ally Deri, D-E-R-Y, that's his last name, Aryeh Deri, from serving as minister. Israel's high court disqualified the Shas chairman, ultra-right-wing nutcase,
That's party.
from
right.
serving as health and interior minister, a move that could jeopardize the coalition's chance of survival.
So he's
So again, they're
disqualified
playing
from
Gloria
serving as a
Gaynor
minister.
2. According to the petitioners to the High Court, Deri's criminal conviction, in the past he's been convicted of tax evasion,
Oh.
and that he got a suspended sentence because he promised that he would no longer serve in public life. And as soon as he got the suspended sentence, he ran. Now he's a minister.
Yeah, that's a move.
So the High Court said, you lied to us. Basically, you can't serve because of, quote, moral turpitude.
Huh. Well, I mean, it's a grounds. There has to be somebody willing to enforce this promise.
Right.
And
So,
I guess they
it's
can
really
there.
sort of kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And so, let's see. The Prime
why not?
Minister and his partner understand well, according to Haaretz, that they are now in a very tangled legal and political bind. To them, the verdict is an almost insurmountable obstacle. Or as senior legal observer put it, they locked them up on all sides and threw the key down a well. The justice cited two main reasons to disqualify him. The first is Derry's repeat conviction of tax violations. The second is his false representation in which he said that he intended to step down from power forever, which led Jerusalem Magistrates Court president to approve the lenient plea. Not only do these two causes not exclude each other, they support one another, the justice officer wrote. So, big problem there. And, of course, they've said, well, we won't accept this, so what do? You're going to eliminate the Supreme Court? I mean, there's so many things rolled into this.
Well, they did.
The religious factions in Israel not wanting to pay taxes. Sure. The religious faction in Israel now being a part of government and trying to direct the interior ministry in terms of what's okay and what's not, if you'll excuse the expression, what's kosher and what's not.
Might be really what is kosher. You never know.
And, they don't want to serve in the army. They're making the secular Jews in Israel pay all the taxes, serve in the army, defend the country, and do all the work. And that's not going over well. But, what are the secular Israelis to do? They'll actually have to make common cause with the Arabs if they want the numbers to defeat the religious right. And they're not ready to.
Okay.
So that's why there's government every 3 weeks.
Well, that's you're either going to have to get over it or live with the situation, I suppose. It's interesting, too, and I guess puts them in a bit of a bind, you would think. I guess if their religious right is anything like our religious right, they can just be hypocritical about it and say...
Well, of course, but the point is, what are they going to do?
Matter.
Are they going to try to get rid of the Supreme Court? If they do,
I think they were
that's a
thinking
constitutional
of that.
crisis.
Yeah, well, didn't they? Somebody floated something about, perhaps giving their legislature more power to directly overrule decisions made by the Supreme Court very recently. Was it related to this?
Yeah, I mean, the court will say, fine.
Yeah,
we would like that. Why
Why
don't you take all our power away? We'll just, retire.
Oh, I doubt that they would say such a thing.
Pope Benedict's residence is empty. We'll just move there.
Yeah, right. Well, that's where all the retirees go. But it's an interesting quandary in a country like Israel with an official religion and everything. What do you do if your Supreme Court, which can, I guess, claim the mantle of religion? They don't. They tend to be more, secular and legalistic in the way they handle
it got
things,
to the point where,
you lied.
I think
God
what happened
like
is
that.
10 of 11 judges said he has to go. And so the Shas party said, look at that. The Ashkenazi judges voted against us and the Sephardic judge voted with us.
Okay. Well, I don't know if that's going to hold sway.
I'm just saying,
I'm just saying that I think maybe he's also the fifth dentist as well.
Right. And for those of you who don't know what that means, the European Jews vote one way and the Jews in the rest of the world vote another way. And it's becoming the case that Israel is not really run by secular European Jews anymore.
Yes, well, that's true. And that's a big shake-up as well. But, I mean, the judges are who they are.
This is not your grandfather's Israel.
No. So, interesting. All right, well, it's nobody's Israel now because they can't govern themselves.
Well, it's really becoming somewhat ungovernable. So there's that.
Yeah.
This piece is Netanyahu gets a political crisis and a personal message from the High Court by insisting he will not resign his ministry. Aryeh Deri has rolled a live grenade at the feet of the prime minister. So it just gives you a feel for what's going on there. The prime minister and his partner, again from Haaretz, understand well that they are now in a very tangled legal and political bind. To them, the verdict is an almost insurmountable obstacle. And those close to Attorney General Gali Baharv Miara believe that once Deri is removed from the government table, no constitutional tricks, however creative, will bring him back.
All right, well, I'd love to see a definitive answer on somebody's constitution for once.
The judges cited the two main reasons. Again, the first is repeat conviction of tax violations. The tax violation is a big deal.
Yeah, sure.
Because there's a whole lot going on in terms of, this is like, the sovereign citizen movement for Israel.
Oh, boy.
Like who has to pay taxes and who doesn't, and who's obligated to do this and who's not. So, it strikes really at the heart of the state. Very complicated. And then, I think after the break, what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about two things. Kathy Hochul and her pick for the state Supreme Court Chief Justice got rejected.
Yeah.
And maybe that's over, and maybe that's not over. Maybe she'll handle it like Israel.
Yeah.
So,
right.
it's not like it just happens there. It happens here, too. And there's a lot to say about that. So I want to talk about that after the break. And then we'll get back to the extraordinary steps to avoid the debt ceiling, which every story, I'm looking at this Washington Post story, but every story should point out, brought to you by House Republicans. Because that's the context.
And not all of them do a good job in pointing that out. That's true. Very often just laid at the feet of Congress and bickering, etc. So, the usual tricks. Interesting, though. Yeah, I'd like to find out what's going on with the judge. That story lingers. I guess I was hoping that would go away before I had to find out what was really happening with that, but no. Important development. And, the governor continues to fight with the legislators of her own party over a judicial nomination that no one likes, which is weird.
Yeah, we'll talk about what, where, how, and why. We don't know, but that's what we're going to talk about.
We don't know, but we will talk about it. No one ever said you had to.
We're going to talk about why we don't know.
Oh, well, that's easy. Yeah, that we could certainly fill 2 hours with, but we only have
the reason we don't know
is
it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, we'll try to fill up an hour with that.
Okay. Well, our first challenge is filling up 15 seconds between now and when we can
you can do that. You're
feasibly stop talking. Well, I'm doing my best, but at any rate, we'll be right back after this 2-minute break, which is going to be super exciting and wonderful. And now we're out of time. See? Let's exit. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Hi, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What did we figure out during the 2-minute break? I don't remember.
That I don't know how to use Mastodon.
Oh, yes. Well, that is, that's becoming an issue. You did send me something. You were mentioning you sent me something yesterday on Mastodon, but it kind of went as I don't know, what did they call it? A private message? A direct message?
It's a private message, which is a DM on Twitter, and the difference is now I can't find it.
Okay. Yeah. Now, my recollection is that was it the George Santos story, though?
Oh, it might have been the George Santos story
that's what
of the day.
Yeah, the moment, the hour.
Right. Mm-hmm. Which was the Brazilian drag performer, and others claim George Santos was a drag performer under the name Kitara Ravache. Not confirmed, but it sure looks like Santos.
It does. Could be Photoshop, I guess.
And then they add important context here. Republican electeds have directed hate and violence toward the drag community.
Yes.
So that's why it's important.
Right. That's the obvious context. Although, on Mastodon, you have to be careful and make sure that everybody knows that it's not just me taking pot shots at the drag community. It's me helping perpetuate pot shots being taken. Maybe that's not, Well, it's a sensitive subject. Okay.
It is. It's difficult, but
at least we know what his name
obviously,
was
Santos felt obligated to respond to it, so we'll see what happens.
Yes.
So Kathy Hochul, who was lieutenant governor under Andrew Cuomo, which I should add is disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Right. Troubled rocker Tommy Lee.
Hochul takes over. People pretty much like her. They give her the honeymoon period, and then she gets reelected by a smaller amount than we thought. And we blame a lot of that on New York State Democrats because they're very much focused on fighting, their left. They don't spend enough time fighting Republicans. And so they're not particularly united in New York, and that whole party needs to be revamped. But in the meantime, Hochul then wins, and then one of the things she does after she wins is rather than try to unite the party with a consensus pick, she has an opening on a Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court in New York State, which is evenly split between conservatives and liberals. And so her pick will determine what happens. Is that important? It sure is. That's the court that determined how redistricting would go in New York State and cost the Democrats seats and perhaps Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes ahead and she picks a fellow named Hector LaSalle, who is a conservative Democrat, disliked by labor, by activists, by women's rights folks. And they campaign against him. She says, I'm going to appoint him anyway. So she sends him to committee, and yesterday Senate committee rejects Hector LaSalle for chief judge. The Judiciary Committee voted the nominee down 10-9. 10 Democrats voted no. Two of them voted
I'm not even here.
yes. 7 of them voted.
How many are there?
Well, we'll just pass it along, including 6 Republicans or 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats, without recommendation, but that still means it goes to the full Senate. So it failed 10-9. And according to Senate rules, this is where it gets interesting, if the Senate decides not to send the nominee to the full Senate by committee, it doesn't go to the full Senate.
Okay.
Hochul is demanding a vote in the full Senate anyway.
Well,
The head of the
that's not how
Senate
it
said,
works.
our rules say we don't have to. It doesn't work that way. We decide. Advising consent is up to the Senate. Senate decides its own rules. Hochul says, wait a minute. I think that there's a New York State constitutional reason for why you should send it to a full vote, and I may sue you.
Oh, you know what? That'll work. That'll be great.
But, so I don't know whether the suit wins or the suit loses, but why is she doing this? Why does she push a judge that was unpopular, and having lost, why is she continuing to push the judge anyway?
It's weird.
And that's really
isn't
where it starts to get interesting.
Yeah, this is the sort of story that makes people say, what does he have on her? Or something
There
crazy
has
like
to
that.
be more
Right.
to it than just that. Is it just stubbornness?
Hard
Is
to
it
believe.
Andrew Cuomo's style? Remember, she was his lieutenant governor of
maybe.
Using conservative Democrats in the legislature to split the Democratic Party so that conservative Republicans could get what they wanted.
But why?
Cuomo supported that because he supported a breakaway conservative group of Democrats who voted with Republicans. And she is his nominee. So, what's all that about? Is it simply she grew up in New York politics where you spend your time hippie punching because that's what you do? Nobody really seems to understand why she is doing what she's doing.
No, it's unclear still.
It's unclear still.
You haven't done
no matter
anything.
who you ask,
here,
no matter
right?
who you look at, you don't really get a clear and cogent explanation as to why she is doing this.
Is he a really
Now, Hochul
awesome
and some
judge?
political observers says this newsletter called New York Focus says, including former Court of Appeals Chief Judge Jonathan Lippman, have argued that whatever the result of the committee vote, the state constitution requires a vote from the full Senate. But the committee plays a role, but we believe the Constitution requires action by the full Senate. While this was a thorough hearing, it wasn't a fair one because the outcome was predetermined, said Hochul. What did she mean? Before the committee vote, some of the members of the committee said, this guy's terrible. We're not voting for him.
But that's not.
So she's using that
That's
as an
not a
excuse
thing.
to say it wasn't fair.
That's, what?
I mean, is that outrageous?
That's crazy. I mean, people didn't make up their minds whether or not they were going to vote for Hochul before Election Day.
I mean, that's like saying George Santos is
insane.
disqualified even before
Yeah.
he gets to Congress. No, you have to wait for him to win and get to Congress
Well, that's
before
true.
you're allowed to say that.
Well,
What? What are you talking about?
Yeah, you have to wait before you can do anything about it, I guess. But still, you want to make up your mind before the moment at which you vote. So you can't just sit there in ignorance and then go, yes, no. I'd be interested what the text of the New York Constitution says that makes them think that he's entitled to a floor vote. It'd be interesting if it wouldn't be out of keeping for Democrats to say, well, just plain like we use in the federal Constitution, advice and consent.
I do have a copy, 46 pages of the state Constitution, but unfortunately, all the article did is give me a link to that. It didn't go through it and say, here's the passage that you should really pay attention to. And
that's the problem with, newspapers, what is a newsletter of some kind. I guess they should do this. This is all news outlets. That's what I enjoy most about reading the news is you can sometimes take the time to go and track the thing down. I'd be very curious. It won't affect anything, on the federal Constitution. I'd just be curious to know whether it wouldn't be an inconsistent position for Democrats to say, we think, advice and consent of the Senate means there has to be a vote, just as we thought it should have been the case for Merrick Garland.
Think advice and consent of the Senate means that you have to do what the governor says.
Well, they may think, well, you have to hear from the full Senate, which, like, as I was saying, it might have been something you might have seen Democrats argue over the Merrick Garland nomination. But in the end, the decision was the Senate gets to decide how it will advise and register its consent.
They make its own rules. Governor Kathy Hochul's nominee for chief judge of the state's highest court is highly unlikely to get a confirmation vote from the full Senate. Senate Democratic spokesperson Mike Murphy told this newsletter, New York Focus. As of Friday afternoon, 14 Democratic state senators had publicly announced their opposition. Many senators have said they're opposing LaSalle, who serves as a judge on a mid-level state appeals court, due to what they characterize as his conservative record on issues including abortion rights and labor unions. As opposition is mounted, Hochul and other supporters have urged Senate Democrats to at least bring his nomination to the floor. The focus on the floor vote is a tacit recognition that as things stand, LaSalle would need Republican votes to reach a majority, likely a deal breaker for Democratic Senate leadership, and he didn't get it. As it turns out, this article was written just before then. Democratic leadership in the state Senate, which has a Democratic supermajority, generally refuses to bring bills or nominations to a vote if they will need Republican support to pass. But with 14 out of 42 Democrats opposing LaSalle, he'd need at least 4 Republicans to vote in his favor to win confirmation. He would get that. He got it on the committee. He'd get that in the state Senate because they would want to embarrass the Democrats.
Yes, probably.
But he'd need Republican votes even in the improbable scenario that every other Democrat votes in his favor. So to reach the floor, the nomination would have to win approval from the Senate Judiciary Committee, which it didn't.
Yeah.
And this spokesman said judiciary is not just advisory, as with all nominations. It would have to pass through committee to get to the floor. So it's unclear. This article doesn't go and say why that's true. Some LaSalle supporters have argued that New York law requires that nominees to the Court of Appeals receive an up or down vote from the full Senate, but no such nominee has ever failed to win approval, and so the legal question's never been tested. I suppose the governor could file some sort of lawsuit if they fail to vote, but it's not as if the governor hasn't sat an appointment from the mayor and others. So we don't know what's going on with there. And every time you try to click and say, okay, they've referred me to this other thing, well, there's a LaSalle supporter arguing that New York's law requires nominees to the Court of Appeals receive an up or down vote. But it doesn't really give you a citation that say, okay, here's the language that you could look at. I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't know how to interpret it anyway. Yes, it's interesting, but these articles aren't helping us track it down.
All right. Well,
at least not live.
Yeah, and I can't both scan the New York State Constitution and listen to what's going on here and be able to understand. So maybe after...
I appreciate your vote of confidence in saying you'd rather listen.
Yeah, than read the New York State Constitution. Hello?
Just hello? Is this thing on?
Yeah, and you're right, it is. It looks like a rather long Constitution. Yeah, no, maybe later in the show we'll see if we can track it down. But right now I want to hear the story. So, okay.
But again, why is she doing this?
I don't know. And
maybe it has something to do with the fact that the Democrats have a supermajority.
Maybe.
Because if you have a supermajority, it means that the Democrats in the Senate decide what's going to pass and what's not.
Yeah.
If you lower that to a mere majority, perhaps in her mind, in her twisted mind, she thinks that gives the governor more power to set the agenda, not the Senate.
But what if it doesn't?
Well, I don't know, but if you think like Andrew Cuomo, that's your game. If
Very
you think like
unusual.
Andrew Cuomo, you want to give 10 Democrats breakaway power so that the liberal majority doesn't get to set the agenda. I do. I mean, he played that game, and that's why there was a breakaway group of Democrats. So maybe she thinks the way he does.
Maybe it's.
I don't know.
I guess then at that point you would say, well, what if the way he thinks sucks and ends up costing him the governorship, for instance, and that's how you became governor? Would you say then that maybe you shouldn't think that way?
I'm all powerful.
Yeah, I mean, she is. She's been reelected. That is a thing. But why are you
DeSantis.
the governor?
Look what he could do. I can do that.
I could understand. Okay,
No,
jealousy of other governors, but
because the Florida legislature is completely compliant, and New York State,
Well, that's true, and that's a big difference. But yeah, just to me, like the natural instinct at some point is.
I mean,
everybody's saying they don't want him?
How do you get to be all powerful as governor? Because the state legislator says you can have all the power. Well, that works in Florida. It doesn't work in New York State and most other places.
I mean, I guess that's really the bottom line. Can I have all the power? No. There's the answer.
Oh, I mean, well,
let's move on and try and find some other way of doing things. Then, no, I would like all the power. Okay, I understand that you would like all the power. It's just not. Now you're a national story. Now I'm trying desperately not to care about this story, and yet here I am. And I would like an answer from you as to why you're doing this. And a good response to that would have been 2 weeks ago to say, you know what, never mind. Right. I'll find another judge. There are plenty. Weird.
All right. So, again, that leads us back to our last story that I have for today. U.S. braces for extraordinary steps to avoid the debt ceiling. The Treasury Department is poised to take defensive action to prevent a default that could do irreparable harm to the economy. You have to dig through the KITM files and pull out all the pieces you did, all the podcasts you did about platinum coins and about how minting the coin will save the republic.
Minty coins.
So I think it's that. Like, one of those Godiva dark chocolate with mint,
Yes.
It's one of those.
Be a lot more support for that.
Yeah. So I don't understand it. I didn't understand it then. I don't understand it now. But apparently if you mint a coin and declare it to have enough value and then sell it to the feds who have to buy it, then you have the money to pay the credit that you owe or something.
So. Yeah, well, and there's a couple of provisions.
There's probably a better explanation than that, but that's the best
that's really the basics of it. I mean, constitutionally, the government has the power to mint. Well, it doesn't have to be a coin either, I don't think, but to mint currency in any denomination that they want. Although I don't know what the process is to decide whether or not you'll do that. It might be a congressional decision. It might be a executive decision, but so the theory is, well, if you can't borrow any more money, but you have a fiat currency, you
should mint a coin out of orichalcum and make it out of stuff that was available in mythical Atlantis.
Oh, all right. Well, I don't know if it matters that much what it's made of. I guess I think the platinum coin idea was just, well, if you're going to make a coin and say it's worth $1 trillion,
everybody's gold.
You might as well make it out of something, fancy and expensive.
Well, that's why I suggest something from Atlantis.
Yes, okay. For instance,
then there'll be only one.
Right. Or the Wakanda medal from Black Panther. But whatever it is. I mean, you can mint it at anything, declare whatever value you want, and I guess it's only upsetting to people who still don't understand the magic of, of fiat currency, that all money in circulation is only worth something because the government says it is. And but it's somehow easy to believe that this piece of paper is worth $20, but the idea of a new coin being very high in value, that I can't comprehend. No. That's beyond. If you did that, then you could just do that all the time. Yeah, you can. We do. The whole economy is based on that. So it is a little absurd, but it's no more absurd than the idea that the government that has the power to do this can be stymied and has to shut down because it's not allowed to borrow money. Whose money are we borrowing, and why is it any more valuable than the ones we make? I don't know. There's no answer.
So I don't know. Anyway, that's we may run out of money as soon as today.
Oh, all right.
In theory.
Well, I'll take
so
care
that's
of that.
why
Really,
I'm bringing
I
it
hadn't
up
heard
as
that
a story now. And again, Liam Donovan, we talked about this a little yesterday, I think. I don't remember things anymore because I'm so old. But Liam Donovan made the point that part of the problem in terms of a crisis is the fact that both sides think that they're going to win. And that's always the case when you have a crisis, because if one of them thinks they might not win, or both of them think they might not win, you're more willing to compromise. But if you both think you're going to win the fight, then you don't compromise, and that's how you get into trouble.
Well, one good compromise, if we do a coin, great thing about the coin is there are two sides to a coin. And so traditionally, I suppose we could put, and you wonder about who you put on the coin, we could put one Democrat on one side and one Republican on the other side. The newspapers would back it, and it would actually work. People would stop doubting, I think, if we said both sides are on this coin.
Yes, but whichever side it lands on, the Democrats are in disarray.
Yeah, that's true. We'll have to hope for one of those land on the side things.
Right. I saw in
Santos
passing, this is sort of amusing, given the context that we started from, Representative Roger Williams from Texas 25.
Roger Williams. Okay.
Was asked about George Santos.
Oh.
And I don't even know the context of what he's saying. It doesn't really matter. But Representative Williams says, I don't condone what he said. I have no idea what Santos said this time. I don't condone what he's done. I don't think anybody does. But that's not my role. He was elected. He represents a million people. That is the exact logic that Shas is using in Israel. Saying, look, I know he's a crook, and I know the court disqualified him, but people elected him. He has to serve.
Yes, well, that's a very formalistic approach. It's we haven't settled this thing, but
which is
it's
a really
also up to you.
way of saying we won, so too bad for you.
Right, and I mean, I guess if you're going to make that sort of
why don't you just say that?
To the text?
You don't have to fancy it up. You don't have to gussy it up with all this fancy talk about he represents this many people. We won, you lost. Shut up, get out of here.
That's the other way of explaining it, of course. But yeah,
don't ask me to be consistent. Don't ask me to be moral. We won, you lost. Shut up.
Yeah, that's a better explanation than sticking with the original point. I mean, it's a better formulation of it, because if you just say, well, he was elected, so he represents a million people. So,
under what name?
So
maybe that's not his real name. You don't even know that.
That may be true. He may have, there's a fraudulent election certificate, and that's a legitimate basis on which they should have challenged him on January 3rd when he first showed up. But it is an interesting thing, and it's like I said, the argument of just shut up is a better line, because if you have a reporter that follows up and says, well, you were elected too, right? So, I mean, you have some rights in all of this, and the Constitution here is pretty clear. Since you're going to be formalistic about it, it's up to you whether or not he continues to serve. You can expel him, but you're saying you're not going to. Is that what I hear you saying? We have a couple of listeners who are not spending their time looking up the New York State Constitution, but rather listening to the show, who have a couple of questions and points to make. All right. What are they?
Bosengood says, why isn't the debt ceiling unconstitutionally under the full faith and credit clause? Well, I don't even understand the question.
Oh, okay. And the answer is no one has ever asked, brought that to court. And tried to declare it unconstitutional, because we haven't had a live controversy about it yet that it even mattered to wait for the court to answer.
The same reason why Kathy Hochul can't bring her nomination to the Senate floor.
We don't know.
In New York
Maybe.
State. The answer is we don't know, because nobody's ever tried it.
But I mean, it's a good argument, and no one's ever had to make it because no one does this.
Right. And Bill in Portland, Maine points out, if you're going to mint that coin, make that minty coin, you should put Simpson's face on one side and Bowles' face on the other.
Yeah, why not?
So
That'll
I
make
think
them
that's
happy.
a great idea. We should mint the Simpson Bowles coin and say we have solved the financial crisis in the United States,
That's
just
right.
like they intended.
And there'll be a little.
It's the only
you got to
thing
have
they've
a
ever
motto,
done, but
right?
they did
Both
it,
sides. You could write on it. Yeah, it could work. This is a real possibility. But yeah, we'll be
Alan
looking for
Simpson
names
and
to put
Erskine
in there.
Bowles, for those of you keeping track at home.
Yeah, or name your kids Erskine. Everyone.
Erskine Bowles Jr.
Yeah, or you can imagine being that guy. I'd rather go by George Santos at that point. Erskine George Santos Bowles III.
Yeah,
Shoot,
you can do
what's
that.
your name? Okay, well, yeah, I guess nominations are open for who to put on the coin. I did throw that out. Joan
You
gave
could
a straight-laced
put George
answer.
Santos on one side and Carlos Danger on the other. You could do that.
Right? Yeah, that's the thought. Stormy Daniels probably should be on a coin at some point, just to see what kind of reaction you get from the former guy.
Oh, yeah. Then you could sell it to him for $1 trillion.
Right. Oh, right. At least. I wanted to keep the coin quiet. Okay. It's your money. Anyway, it is a good question, and that's a thought that, a lot of people have asked that question. One of the issues with it is, the world economy would crash before you got an answer from the courts. So I don't know how effective an argument it is. It's arguably correct, but by the time you found out about it, right, we're all living in Mad Max, so.
Right.
They'll be like,
Anyway,
you can shout
that's
that
all I
from
got
car
today.
to car.
I got
We were
nothing
right.
else. That's it. I'm
Oh,
done.
okay. Well, good. That's a fine amount of material. And,
Well, it'll have to do.
yeah.
Now
there's nothing
I have
else
4
we can do
minutes
about
left,
it.
so I can go spend some time reading the New York State Constitution. And see
Right.
if I
Oh,
can-
yeah. So try that, and then you can text the answer if you
I can
find
do
it
that.
in the next couple of minutes, and I'll read it aloud. And let's see, how come I missed the Bosangood question? Was it directed to you on Twitter and
It's
I
on
missed
Twitter.
it? Or?
I don't know. I just saw it.
Well, you can look up for that too. I'm monitoring the KITM hashtag, but maybe I need to refresh it. But all right, it's a good question, and maybe we'll probably come back around to addressing it at some point in the next few minutes while you're looking things up in the Constitution. All right. So it being Thursday, we'll have the answer at least by Monday on the Constitution, if not sooner.
Maybe we will. That is to say, if you go and look it up and figure it out.
I mean, this is an empty promise, just so everyone knows. Right up front.
We're into empty promises.
Significant chance I will not look at the Constitution at all.
Yeah, there's a significant chance I'll forget about it between now and Monday. But I'll do my best to try to remember and see if we have the answer.
Okay.
Alrighty, take care.
Very good.
I'll
Thank
see you then.
All right. I'll look forward to it. See you then. Have a great weekend. And we'll take a look around to see what other subjects might what can we shoehorn in before our break? Let's see. That's one of our first issues. Okay, here's a short one. I think we may recall, that is to say you, because I don't recall the firearms attacks on North Carolina power substations, and then I reported to you that similar attacks had taken place in, was it Washington State? Pacific Northwest, certainly. I think it was Washington. Oregon, they're just too mellow, I guess, to shoot at their power stations. But at any rate, I think it was taking place in Washington, and that they had some leads and made some arrests in those attacks in the Northwest, and so that was good news, but there wasn't any arrests yet in North Carolina. Still the case, but worse than that, another attack on another power substation. This one didn't make as much of a splash, though I assume it knocked power out briefly to a small area of North Carolina. But just wanted to let you know that was still ongoing, because it's probably something we're going to have to be thinking about long term. Another North Carolina power substation damaged by apparent gunfire. I mean, really, it was gunfire. Weeks after grid attacks left thousands without power. That reported by CBS News. Lee Cohen reporting this yesterday. See if we can just scan it and get the location for you. This one, damage occurred at a power substation in Thomasville, about an hour away from Moore County, where just 2 weeks ago 2 other substations were attacked by gunfire. So let's see. Energy United, the power company around there, said that company officials learned of an equipment issue, that's in quotes, it's the equipment issue, at the Pleasant Hill substation on Tuesday morning, at which time crews were sent to assess the situation. There, they found that a transformer had been damaged, quote, from an apparent gunshot, and law enforcement was notified. And it's just weird caging of the language. Like, we got there and there was a small hole in it with a bullet inside. Apparently gunfire, though it could have been thrown with great force by perhaps a professional baseball pitcher or something like that. We don't want to rule anything out here. So, but here again, the Randolph County Sheriff's Office said Tuesday that police responded to a vandalism call at the substation, which, may be the wrong call to be making, but, you're asking the police to come out. The police will, I guess, in Randolph County, I assume they're not quite as busy as they are in some other places. Presumably they will come out, either whether you call them for vandalism or terrorism. Doesn't matter a great deal what language is used in a 911 call or the non-emergency call, but the conclusion will make a difference. But you don't want to color things by starting out that way and just saying, well, it's random vandalism. Although it could be, I guess, in the sense that in many places around the country, it's just a weird pastime to shoot at stuff while you drive past it. Witness, there are road signs all over the place filled with pellet holes from shotguns, so you never know. It becomes somebody's hobby to shoot at power stations, maybe without a political agenda. I guess that is possible. All right, we'll see what Greg found as we approach our break. Page 22 of the 45-page New York State Constitution apparently has the first hint. Let's read it while we've got our music rolling. The Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals shall be the Chief Judge of the State of New York, right? And shall be the Chief Judicial Officer of the United Court System. There shall be an administrative board of the courts which shall consist of the Chief Judge. Okay, wait a second. So far this is the role of the Chief Judge. The Chief Judge shall, with the advice and consent of the Administrative Board of the Courts, appoint a Chief Administrator. All right, now this isn't it. That's not yet. That's just the first section he found. So, okay, keep searching. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. You can tell I'm now scanning the Constitution because I was late in coming back. I'm not even certain off the bat exactly which article of the Constitution this would be in. I don't know how New York organizes its Constitution. I mean, if you're looking, do you look in the legislative section or the judiciary section or the executive section to find this out? Now, I'm guessing it's looking to me like it might be in the judiciary section, section 21, or it's Article 6. Section 21 deals with how vacancies in the courts are filled, and maybe that's it. Let me take a look down there. I'm on that page now. When a vacancy shall occur, otherwise than by expiration of term in the office of Justice of the Supreme Court, of Judge of the County Court, of Judge of the Surrogate Courts, or the Judge of the Family Court, outside of the City of New York. Okay, so this is lower court judges. Doesn't really talk about Court of Appeals. That's another weirdness. New York calls its highest court the Court of Appeals, and its lowest court the Supreme Court, by the way. That's kind of interesting. And it's sort of archaic usage involved there. But the Supreme Court is like the trial level courts in the state, and because that's like the supreme repository of justice, the starting point of where you would start things off. And the Court of Appeals is the one that handles all the appeals from the supreme source of justice. It's a little weird, but that's the way they've got it. Let's see. Is there anything further down? There's like 3 paragraphs that begin with "a vacancy shall occur." So the second one, the George of Court of Claims. The third one, paragraph C here, when a vacancy shall occur in the office of judges elected to the citywide court of civil jurisdiction of the City of New York. Paragraph D is about judges of district courts. Yeah, I don't know. It is, so far it doesn't even discuss the Court of Appeals yet. So again, open question. Where would you classify that? We're going to have to read through the whole thing. Is that in the articles about the judiciary and how to fill vacancies there? Is it a power that is described in the legislative section, and whether or not they are going to hold, I guess the question of whether or not they have to hold a vote and give their advice and consent on the floor, or is there something in the executive branch that says that the governor shall appoint by, with the advice and consent of the Senate, the justices of the Supreme Court, or not the Supreme Court, of course, the Court of Appeals. Okay. Greg's on to something here. Let's take a look. I know, we're all kind of concerned about this. Page 15 we're on now. What do we have here? The commission shall consider the qualifications of candidates for appointment to the offices of judge and chief judge for the Court of Appeals. All right, that's good. But the commission, what commission are we talking about? All right. We'll read this through. The commission shall consider the qualifications of candidates for these positions. This would include the right position that we're talking about here. Whenever a vacancy in those offices occurs, and shall prepare a written report and recommend to the governor persons who are well qualified for those judicial offices. So presumably this guy who she's nominating was among those recommended. Now that'd be an interesting situation. I guess it could change things. Now we have to go back and look at the report. If they nominated, or if they said there are 6 judges that we would recommend and you pick one. Because that's what it says here, is just they'll consider the qualifications for candidates, plural, to appointments to the offices. Whenever a vacancy occurs, shall prepare a report and recommend to the governor persons who are well qualified. What if they only give you one name? That's a question. Is the governor obligated to choose that one name? And I mean, it may have been the case, like I could see it being the case that it develops that way, that would the original intent is for you to give them 5, 6 people to choose from. But what if you just choose one? Are they forced? Can the commission force a judge on you that way? Anyway, next up, the governor shall appoint with the advice and consent of the Senate, which is very much like the federal Constitution language, which doesn't apparently entitle you to any kind of a vote. The governor shall appoint, with the advice and consent of the Senate, from among those recommended by the Judicial Nominating Commission, a person to fill the office of chief judge or associate judge, as the case may be, whenever a vacancy occurs, provided, however, that no person may be appointed a judge of the Court of Appeals unless such a person is a resident of the state and has been admitted to the practice of law in this state. That goes even further than the federal Constitution. For at least 10 years, the governor shall transmit to the Senate the written report of the Commission on Judicial Nomination relating to the nominee. And they did, and they read it, and they said, we don't like the guy. So, when a vacancy occurs for the office of Chief Judge or Associate Judge of the Court of Appeals, and the Senate is not in session to give its advice and consent to an appointment to fill the vacancy, the governor shall fill the vacancy by interim appointment upon the recommendation of a commissioner on judicial nominations as provided in this section. All right, that's not really applicable here, but, All right, so, yeah, Greg's summation of it is first you make a short list, then you pick someone. That's the process. The question is, does she now use the old list or make a new one? Oh, if you decide, for instance, that you're not going to go forward with the current nomination, does she go back to the list that she was originally provided, or does she say start over? That's an interesting one. An interim appointment shall continue until the Senate shall pass upon the governor's selection. That's another interesting pull from this. But I think that's only if the vacancy occurs when the Senate is not in session. And the Senate is in session. The Senate's the problem here, from Hochul's point of view. All right, if the Senate rejects an appointment, a vacancy in the office shall occur 60 days after such rejection. Although, I guess I would argue the Senate hasn't rejected anybody for this position. The committee has refused to send the nomination to the floor, but the Senate hasn't acted at all. If an interim appointment to the Court of Appeals be made from among the justices of the Supreme Court or the appellate divisions thereof, it does say Supreme Court, that appointment shall not affect the justice's existing office nor create a vacancy in the Supreme Court or the appellate division thereof. This is very annoying. Okay. So let's see. Which line are you looking at here, Greg? So you now say, so Senate shall continue, and that's the argument. Where are we? shall continue what? When a vacancy occurs? I'm not real sure. Okay. Well, we'll have to continue reading, but at least I think we've found the section that deals with it. I just don't, I don't know that this works for Hochul, which, it's an interesting argument, and it would be fun if it were also retroactively applicable to the Merrick Garland case, but it isn't, and that I'm not sure. All right, and this language that Greg is sending about what the Senate shall and shall not do, I think only it appears to be a subordinate clause to what they're supposed to do in the case of an interim appointment being made. And there has not been an interim appointment made at this stage of the game, so it might be inoperative that the Senate shall do anything. So it's real interesting. I mean, and it could be interpreted differently by the courts in New York State, but of course the final word on it would be the Court of Appeals, and they're missing a judge, a chief judge. So it would be a very interesting fight. But yeah, I can't see any way where a lawsuit, it's very much out of keeping with American judicial tradition and legislative practice for a judicial branch to be able to order a particular vote to take place on the legislative floor. I would imagine that New York would probably want to mirror the federal guidelines, the federal jurisprudence on separation of powers. Because after all, remember, our federal constitution guarantees us a Republican form of government, in a small r, Republican form of government in the states. New York would be included. So, yeah, I would be very surprised if it was the conclusion of the judges in New York that the judicial branch could force the legislature to take up a certain measure and have a vote on it. That would be very surprising, and particularly for somebody so unpopular. So, I don't know. I don't think she's getting anywhere with that one. All right, we can move on to a few other things, but at least we know approximately where to look for authority, even if it doesn't work, in the New York State Constitution. So it's always a adventure exploring things like that. All right, let's see. Other things I wanted to share with you, if I can get this to work correctly. Here we go. Finding the tweet thread I was interested in from Mastodon. This has to do with the debt limit. And I thought an interesting exposition of one of the issues involved from the Mastodon account of govtrack.us. GovTrack, what the hell is GovTrack? Actually, it's a good question. We can go and see. But I think they are for tracking the progress of bills and other issues through Congress. Interesting, when you go to their site, there's a pop-up that says, we're now on Mastodon. So whoever runs it is very actively promoting the transition from the Bird site to over on Mastodon. GovTrack US tracks the United States Congress began back in 2004 as a project to use technology to make the U.S. Congress more open and accessible. And now that I think about it, I think, is there an About Us section here? If I'm not mistaken, I am now, does it say who started it? I mean, he may be, there we are, Josh Tauberer, who's the kind of person who would, might otherwise leave himself off of the About Us page because, what we're really about is tracking the government, not about promoting the people who made the page. But he's stuck to basic default form for the internet. Josh Tauberer has been at this for quite some time, and I was pretty sure I recognized the name of the site. It's just been redesigned 100 times, and now seeing it on Mastodon sort of disoriented me. But yeah, okay. So I remember the founding of this site fairly well, I think. So anyway, Josh's site makes sense now that they would make a big deal of their being on Mastodon. Anyway, the GovTrack Mastodon account. I don't know whether it's necessarily in his personal control, but it may very well be. Then Josh tweeting from behind this, and he's offers this up. Should we rant about the debt ceiling nonsense, or do you all have that topic covered? Well, there's always room for a rant about the debt ceiling nonsense, and here it is. Here is the short version, no way, of the upcoming debt limit negotiations. And I thought this stated things in a very interesting way. After backing record-breaking deficit spending during the Trump administration and prior, Republicans who backed this deficit spending now plan to block the use of the national debt to cover the spending that has already been enacted. Without debt to cover the deficit, that is, and remember, there are two different things, right? And without borrowing more money in order to cover the expenses that the Congress has authorized, despite the fact that we don't yet have the money for it, that's the deficit, the U.S. will run out of money. Many believe this will be catastrophic for the world economy, and that's precisely why Republicans are using it as leverage to extract policy concessions from the D's. This isn't because Republicans care anything about the national debt. That's an obvious lie, given that they keep voting, of course, to spend more and more money, and they explode the debt every time they have control of Congress and there's a Republican president. But that's what makes it an obvious lie. They increased the debt to record levels when they had the chance, tax cuts, COVID bailouts to airlines, endless wars, etc. They increased spending and decreased revenue like never before. Or as Donald Trump would say, like never before. Don't be fooled by the balanced budget talk. So, on the one hand, agencies are legally obligated to spend the money that the law has previously directed them to spend. Right? When there's an appropriations bill adopted, the agencies are legally obligated to spend the money that those bills tell them to spend. Republicans now want to make use of the use of more debt unlawful. Right? We've run out of legal authority to incur more debt. So without that authorization, i.e. raising the debt ceiling, incurring more debt without that authorization would be illegal. That's the tactic Republicans are trying to use. So, on the one hand, agencies are legally obligated to spend the money that the law has previously directed them to spend. Republicans want to make use of the use of more debt unlawful. So unless the government prints money, some law will have to be broken. That's why the debt limit, and he encloses it in scare quotes here, is complete nonsense. It's a crisis manufactured by Republicans to create catastrophic leverage every few years. The debt limit should be repealed. If you care about the debt, fix the spending and the revenue when they are enacted. So that's a pretty common refrain there, but I thought well put, and brings up a good point here as you're talking about the conflict between, do I obey the law that says that the Congress authorized us to spend X dollars on Y program, or do I obey the part of the law that says that the money that they were counting on to use, the X dollars for Y program, isn't there, and I'm no longer allowed to borrow it from elsewhere? So which law am I following here? The one that says I'm obligated to come up with the money, or the one that says the usual source of the money, borrowing, isn't available to me now? And overlying or underlying all of that is, look, if you print your own money, then yeah, there are two places to get money for fulfilling the obligation to program Y, right? The dollar amount X belongs to program Y by act of Congress. We can either borrow that money from elsewhere and give it to program Y, or you can print that money and give it to program Y. And everybody says, well, if you just print money, then everything's fake and it all goes haywire and nobody believes in the sanctity of our money anymore. And then you say, we have always printed all of our money. It's always been fake. That's paper. It's not worth anything. Even if it were a coin, it's not worth anything in particular. It's certainly not worth anything near the amount that if you're thinking you can melt down a coin and exchange it for that amount of money, no, you can't. There's not that much in it, and it doesn't matter anyway. But, all of this stuff is fiat currency, as has been explained a number of times. And so I guess if you can mint anything, why limit yourself to making $20 bills out of paper when you could make very easily, same paper, right? Same amount of paper. This one says 20 on it. That one says 100. How much is the one that says 100 worth? $100, says the person who's not thinking about this problem at all. But the person who's thinking about it in terms of inherent value says must be worth the same because it's the same amount of paper as that one over there. There's just a different bunch of squiggles on it. Why is this one worth more? And the answer is because we say so. So if we say it's a one with lots and lots of zeros, after it, then it's worth more. How much do you need? $1 trillion? Well, write $1 trillion on that piece of paper. Or if you prefer, put it on a piece of metal. Is that worth $1 trillion? I don't know. I guess so. No one's ever asked. Similar answer to all the other previous questions on today's show. But my guess is, given that the Constitution says you can do this and you can coin money and mint anything you want, then I guess so. Well, if it's that simple, why hasn't anybody ever thought of it before? And the answer is, we haven't really run into this problem all that often. We usually say, you know what? There's two answers. This is another thing, right? Like, there's two ways to get this money. Borrow it or print it. Print it? That's stupid. Well, the Constitution says you can print money. Are you saying the Founding Fathers are stupid? No, I promise. I'm not saying that. Okay, good. Now that that's settled, there are two stupid ways out of this problem. You're saying, Mr. I don't know what, Freedom Caucus guy, no, you can't just print money. That would be stupid. All right, but for instance, is it any stupider than saying, this is the amount of money that you can borrow and no more? Why? Because we say so. Well, let's see. You said also just a minute ago, you can't just mint things just because you say so. Well, by the same token, you can't stop people from borrowing money just because you say you can't because we say so. There's a we say so on either side. Which dumb, pointless exercise do you want to go through? The one where we say, all right, you can borrow more money, or the one where we say, all right, you can create more money? Take your pick. They're both kind of stupid. We get kind of a cool coin and a historic moment out of the second kind, I guess, and it seems interesting and fun. But one side wants to do it the way we've always done it, and one side wants to shake things up. Say the Freedom Caucus Republicans. We want to shake things up. All right, watch this. Here's $1 trillion coin. Not that kind of shaking things up. We wanted a different kind of shaking things up. Well, you didn't get the kind of shake up you wanted, but you did get a shake up. Isn't that enough? I mean, all right. So I think that's a good way to understand it for the balance of the this fight as it goes on. You can think of it that way. You can do either the stupid, pointless exercise of raising or eliminating the debt ceiling, or you can do the stupid, pointless exercise of saying this coin is worth $1 bazillion, quadrillion, gazillion dollars, and I don't even know how much that is. And you could do that several times, do it $1 trillion at a time, do it, you mint a coin that you'll never presumably reach, a vingentillion. That's an actual number. And I don't even know how it works, but, I think, 20 zeros? Is that what the vingen part is? Anyway, there you have it. Those are your two basic choices. One meaningless, stupid gesture, or another. Like, it's the Animal House solution in the end. All right, let's see. Other things to catch up on. Here is an interesting one. Let's read this. It's a name we haven't heard in a long time, and it worries me to see it resurfacing. Daily Beast, an actual current article from 2 days ago, the 17th. Speaking of weird money and strange things that happen and legalisms, etc., we take you now live to Switzerland, not Davos, I don't think, but elsewhere in Switzerland, where we find out that the Swiss, whoever they are, will send millions to sanctioned Russians after Veselnitskaya plot. I don't know if we're pronouncing her name correctly, but that's how we used to pronounce it back in the day when we used to talk about Natalia Veselnitskaya. Remember her? She, the, kind of oddball Russian lawyer from out of nowhere, Cinderella story, who was at the Trump Tower meeting way back in 2016. If it's what I think you mean, I love it story, right? You remember, and they were only meeting about Russian adoptions, not about lifting sanctions, wink, wink. Yeah, her. She's back. The Swiss courts, the subheader here says, have rejected an appeal and will send millions of dollars back to the Russians accused of taking part in a huge money laundering scandal. Wow. That seems pretty startling, don't you think? You're not supposed to get away with money laundering, but I guess in Switzerland you can. What's the story here? Switzerland will return millions of stolen dollars to sanctioned Russians accused of taking part in one of the world's most notorious frauds, according to a court order seen by the Daily Beast. This doesn't sound like it came out fair. The Swiss authorities have rejected an appeal against the decision to send back the stolen loot, despite the knowledge that their investigation into the crime was corrupted by a Russian influence operation orchestrated by the notorious Trump Tower lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya. When we say notorious, we mean that kind of notorious. Veselnitskaya had secret meetings with a consultant to the Swiss Federal Prosecutor's Office, who was fired and convicted after it emerged that he had been gifted luxury Russian vacations, including a bear hunting trip, yuck, while he was working on the case. That's crazy. On one such trip, he was joined by Swiss prosecutor Patrick Lamon, I don't know where you pronounce the accent there, Patrick Lamon, Lamon, and Attorney General Michael Lauber, who posed for a photo together with senior Russian officials. Oh boy. All three of the Swiss officials were involved in investigating, you'll recognize this name, the Magnitsky affair, a $230 million fraud uncovered by Sergei Magnitsky, who was jailed, beaten, and left to die in a prison cell after blowing the whistle on a massive tax scam against Hermitage Capital that implicated a number of Russian officials. Since Magnitsky's death, Bill Browder, the CEO of Hermitage, has led a global campaign for justice, which has succeeded in introducing anti-corruption sanctions laws in numerous countries, including the U.S. and the U.K. Several of the key players in the scam have since been sanctioned under those laws for playing a part in what many Western governments describe as a huge criminal conspiracy. An organized criminal group was involved in serious corruption through the misappropriation of the equivalent of $230 million of Russian state property, according to the UK government. It's funny, it's almost quaint at this point to be quibbling over $230 million, given the scale of Russian corruption at this point. But this was one of the early moves that establishes that they can do this if they want to. And, in Russia anyway. The rest of us don't have to go along with it, but apparently we're opting to go along with it in exchange for Russian bear hunting vacations. The sanctioned individuals include Olga Stepanova, a senior Moscow tax official who signed off on documents relating to the fraud, and her husband, as well as Dmitry Kluyev, is my best guess at the pronunciation of that name, a banker who the UK government says planned the whole fraud. All three of them will receive cash that was frozen in Switzerland by officials who were supposed to be tracing the stolen money. Despite the conclusions made in London and Washington, Swiss authorities have gone along with Moscow's claim that there was no criminal organization running the operation. Oh, okay. Now that explains. There wasn't any. And, George Santos wasn't the drag performer. There was no criminal organization running the operation, which means they will not seize the totality of funds that have been traced from the frozen Swiss bank accounts to the massive fraud. It would not have been possible to ascertain the existence of a criminal organization or a gang involved in all the operations, reads a Swiss Federal Criminal Court order issued on November 23rd and seen by the Daily Beast. Perhaps more about this next. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with finding out what the hell they're doing in Switzerland. It's very interesting. We left off by saying, okay, well, the Russians are claiming that there's no criminal organization here, so therefore give us the money back. Switzerland will return 55% of the frozen funds to the Stepanovs, depending on how that's actually pronounced, totaling $5.5 million, and 100% of the money frozen in Klyuev's account. That's, by the way, the last name there, in case you want to look it up and figure out how to pronounce it for real. Klyuev is how we've anglicized that. And, by the way, not a whole lot of money actually frozen in that guy's account. $37,673. I mean, I'll take it. It's plenty of money for me, but, not the usual amounts you usually would imagine when you're talking about a case like this. They will also return 99% of the money traced to an account belonging to Denis Katsiev, the son of a Moscow government official who was employing Veselnitskaya during her infamous attempt to lobby the Trump campaign back in 2016. How do you like that? She was in New York at the time as part of another trial related to the same $230 million fraud. Katsiev ultimately agreed to pay the U.S. $6 million to settle the suit, which alleged that he had laundered some of the stolen proceeds through his company, Previzon. Veselnitskaya was later indicted for obstruction of justice when it emerged that she had secretly helped draft a supposedly independent statement from the Russian prosecutor's office submitted to the court during the Previzon case. The Swiss, by contrast, are happy to send back $8.1 million to Katsiev. The dilution of the forfeitures is part of the lax Swiss regulations on money laundering, which go against United Nations best practice, and lessens the amount that can be seized every time the illicit cash is funneled through another account. Mark Paeth, Pieth, a former member of the G7's Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering and head of section on economic and organized crime at the Swiss Federal Office of Justice, said the way the punishment was watered down demonstrated the weakness of the Swiss system. In a nutshell, The main challenge for Swiss prosecutors and courts is that they apply a theory that lets the forfeitable funds shrink continuously with every stage of laundering. The Swiss judiciary, therefore, privileges the cunning launderer, this on top of the general risks this country poses. Exclamation point, by the way. He told the Daily Beast. The court also deprived Hermitage of victim status in the case, which means the company's voice can no longer be heard in the process, even though Swiss officials originally said they had opened the probe because of the evidence presented to them by Hermitage. Through this decision, Switzerland has truly gone to the dark side. At a time when everybody is coming down hard on Russia, the Swiss are moving in the other direction, Browder told the Daily Beast. So just something to keep an eye on there, too. And Veselnitskaya making a return to the news. That seems important. And we'll keep an eye on that, I guess. Other things to keep an eye on. Here's just something, ironic and weird. We've all been enjoying the new news outlet Semaphore and their unique format and terrific lineup of writers. So semi-ironic, I guess, that we find out that this is the case. And I guess who knows? I guess they're being open and disclosing all of this, and that's why the New York Times knows. The New York Times is reporting this, I'm sure, with some relish because a news reporting startup that I guess I wouldn't exactly call it a rival to the New York Times at this point, but certainly sets itself up as an alternative news source for the politically savvy. So the New York Times, with some sense of irony, reporting, media startup Semaphore plans to buy out Sam Bankman-Fried's investment. It turns out that he's a major financial backer of the launch of Semaphore, which is just interesting and puts them in a bit of an awkward position. But I don't know if Semaphore's been holding back at all in any way about their reporting for on Sam Bankman-Fried here. But yes, Greg points out that Semaphore poached a lot of New York Times writers, so perhaps they're enjoying the fact that they get to point out that the notorious Sam Bankman-Fried is behind financing this thing. Semaphore is one of several media companies that received money from Mr. Bankman-Fried or his affiliates before his cryptocurrency company fell apart and he was charged with crimes. That's the subheader. Benjamin Mullen and David Yaffe Balani, two of the New York Times reporters, still left at the New York Times after all the poaching to write this story. We'll give you a sense of it, if not the full report. The news startup Semaphore began operating late last year with big ambitions, backed by deep-pocketed investors, but the company soon found itself in a pickle. How to handle its biggest outside investment, roughly $10 million, from Sam Bankman-Fried after his crypto company collapsed and the federal government accused him of fraud. Now Semaphore is planning to buy out Mr. Bankman-Fried's ownership while it explores raising new money. We are planning to repurchase Sam Bankman-Fried's interest in Semaphore and place the money into a separate account until the relevant legal authorities provide guidance as to where the money should be returned, said Justin Smith, Semaphore's co-founder and chief executive. The company's fundraising conversations haven't resulted in any investments yet, according to several people with knowledge of the company's operations. But I'm sure they could get cash from Elon Musk. He'll buy them out. No problem. Semaphore is one of several media companies that receive money from Bankman-Fried or his affiliates. He's, of course, the FTX cryptocurrency exchange guy. You don't really need any more background on him. Some of the other media companies, including Vox Media. How do you like that? So here's the Vox explainer. We're all corrupt now. I mean, probably not, but they all have to deal with this. So Semaphore has to separate themselves from Sam Bankman-Fried. Vox needs to do the same. ProPublica also said that they would return contributions shortly after Mr. Bankman-Fried was arrested. Semaphore has said it would wait for guidance from legal authorities to determine its next steps. I don't know whether that's a big deal or not. That position generated some criticism of the company, which was founded by Justin Smith and Ben Smith. The Smith, I think, non-brothers? I don't know. Anyway, the Smiths, who, not the old new wave band, But anyway, the two of them, Justin and Ben Smith, previously were, just Ben, I guess, previously the New York Times media columnist. Okay. Justin Smith, well, he was doing something else. Until Semaphore replaces Bankman-Fried's investment, setting the cash aside would mean giving up the capital the company could have used for its early expansion. So we'll see whether they sacrifice that in some way or not. Semaphore, which publishes with a staff of about 60 people, raised about $25 million overall before its launch in October. It struck deals worth more than $2 million each with several advertisers before it became publishing, guaranteeing the company monthly cash flow. Two people with knowledge of the deal said, and who are these people, you might ask? But they put together $25 million of operating capital, I guess, $10 million of which comes from Sam Bankman-Fried. That's a big deal. Since the company struck those initial advertising agreements, it has signed ad deals between $100,000 and upwards of $2 million. One of the people said the company plans to generate at least $15 million in revenue. Oh, yeah, me too. I plan that. This year, through a mix of advertising and events, according to another person with knowledge of the company's finances. Stephen Brill, who's amazingly still around as a media entrepreneur, co-founder of the news ratings company NewsGuard, is that what he's doing these days, said there was no shame in having money raised from Mr. Bankman-Fried before he was accused of fraud, but because he was arrested, even a privately held media company has an obligation to be transparent about the deal terms. It's awkward, Mr. Brill said, but it would be hard to argue that this was predictable. Well, it's a lot easier now, of course, that it's all gone down. But at any rate, I thought that was interesting. And that's all. So now you know it. So that's a good thing, because interesting stuff is fun to know. All right, let's see. Other things that I wanted to fill you in on. Here's a piece from Digby's Hullabaloo blog, written by Tom Sullivan there, though not Heather. But I thought an intriguing view of things that I thought I might share with you. I liked it. It was all in the headline, but I'll actually read you the column as well. Global Democratic Revolution to Exporting Autocracy. What? Yes, it took the GOP, just 20 years. Now this clears things up. In other words, he's saying, we've gone from the Iraq escapades that were justified under the mission of exporting democratic revolution around the world. Global democratic revolution. We need to bring democracy to Iraq. Yes, we'll be nation builders, but we'll be building a democratic nation where autocracy used to rule. And that was the big problem, really. We should be bringing democracy there. Whereas 20 years down the road, it's now America, Trumpist America exporting autocracy, although there's plenty of appetite for it around the world. But certainly in light of recent events in Brazil, for instance, you would say, yeah, we're not doing that great at exporting democracy anymore. And in 20 short years, that's a pretty stunning turnaround. And I thought a really interesting observation there from Tom Sullivan, who writes this piece. Here in North Carolina, this New York Times essay by Margaret Renkel strikes very close to home. Which one? We'll read it in a minute. Where Republicans are in charge, spite drives policy, and rationality takes a holiday. See, for instance, just among minor examples, what we discussed yesterday, happening in Ohio. We got to restrict military and military family ballots that come in by mail. In Wyoming, because liberals like it, we want to get rid of electric vehicles, even though it helps everybody, whatever. But various other examples. Where Republicans are in charge, spite drives policy, and rationality takes a holiday. Here, or just west in Tennessee, blue cities have targets painted on them. So we're going to begin with the domestic, right? Here, I guess, an excerpt from that New York Times essay mentioned by Tom here. Last year, when Nashville's Metro Council voted not to support the state's bid for the city to host the 2024 Republican National Convention, retaliation was widely understood to be inevitable, according to Nashville's NPR affiliate, WPLN News. Now we know what shape the retaliation will take. Last week, On the first day of the new legislative session, Republicans in both the Tennessee House and Senate introduced legislation that would cut our Metro Council in half, right there in Nashville. The bills ostensibly apply to all city governments. We're not just targeting Nashville. All city governments with legislative bodies larger than 20 members. But guess what? There's only one in Tennessee, and it's Nashville. So if passed, the law would overturn not only a 60-year history, but also the will of the Nashville people who voted in 2015 to keep its 40-member council intact. Now, you could wonder about whether that's a great idea or not, but the people of Nashville were actually asked this directly. Should we cut it back and have maybe perhaps, I'm sure the argument was, a more manageable size for our city council? And they said no. And so now that the city doesn't want anything to do with the state Republican Party's bid to bring the Republican National Convention to Nashville in 2024, the state legislature is going to punish Nashville, and this is how they've decided to do it. The new bill sets a dangerous precedent, according to the Democratic House Caucus Chair, John Ray Clemens. The GOP, and I'll say it that way because they included the periods, the GOP supermajority's continued efforts to overstep into local affairs and usurp the decision-making authority of local officials for the purpose of centralizing more and more power at the state level is concerning, Mr. Clemens told the Tennessean. Ultimately, Nashville families know what's best for Nashville. That was always a Republican premise until they realized that Gimmitarianism was a better premise for them. Now, remember that oft-quoted Jeffersonian maxim that government closest to the people serves the people best? That was once gospel for Republicans, Tom is telling us. As you've guessed, it was as deeply held as Elise Stefanik's principles, as it turns out. Preemption is now in vogue, where the GOP dominates state legislatures. Renkel continues and observes, there is, of course, a long history of legislative preemption in Tennessee. The tactic is also used by Democratic-controlled legislatures, but it is especially egregious in southern states governed by Republican supermajorities. Just last week, another state lawmaker here introduced a bill that would ban local governments from helping residents fund out-of-state abortions, a policy that members of Nashville's council have already proposed. It's no surprise that the party of voter suppression and disenfranchisement is also the party of undermining local governance. But it's worse this year, or at least it feels worse this year, because this year Nashville voters can't count on representation at the national level either. The minoritarian design of the U.S. Senate and surgically precise House gerrymandering left in place by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2019 in the Rucho v. Common Cause case have seen to that. Thanks to that decision, Nashville finds its residents represented by three of the most militant right-wingers the state has ever elected. The GOP's leveraging minority rule it has effectively engineered is now, well, have I read this correctly? The GOP's leveraging minority rule it has effectively engineered, there we are, is now an issue not just in Nashville, but among cities across the country where state capitals are MAGA controlled. Mark E. Green, an ardent Trump supporter who represents Tennessee's 7th District, which now includes a part of Nashville. This is the Blue Island in the middle of Tennessee got divided up among Republican suburban districts surrounding it, essentially, is what happened. So Mark E. Green, an ardent Trump supporter who represents Tennessee's 7th District, which now includes part of Nashville, is a vocal election denier. Mr. Green is one of 34 Republican members of Congress who exchanged text messages with the former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, as the far-right flank of the party sought nominal justification to overturn the results of a free and fair election. Even after the January 6th riot, Mr. Green voted not to certify the 2020 presidential election. As Holly McCall, the editor-in-chief of the nonprofit news site the Tennessee Lookout, writes, such behavior from elected officials has, quote, seeded our voting public with mistrust that continues to harm our democracy. But wrecking American democracy is not enough for the Dead Dog Party. Last fall, Mr. Green flew to Brazil to do the same thing in that much more fragile democracy. In a trip paid for by the American Conservative Union, he met with Brazilian lawmakers pushing to change election laws. The meeting's agenda? To discuss voting integrity policies. Well, we know what happened next. Thanks in part to one of Nashville's representatives in Congress, anti-democracy riots are now an American export. Meanwhile, here at home, Mr. Green has just been named chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, with one of his fellow members on the committee, of course, being murdery traitor Green. So how do you like them apples? The Republican Party under George W. Bush invaded Iraq in 2003 over false allegations that Saddam Hussein had a hand in the September 11th attacks. Bush further claimed that his goal was to plant and spread democracy across the Middle East, that it, quote, must be a focus of American policy for decades to come. Bush imagined a global democratic revolution. That pretense did not survive the occupation that spawned ISIS. It certainly did not survive the arrival of anti-democratic MAGA republicanism roughly a decade later. That Republican Party now exports autocracy abroad and rebrands it as patriotism here at home. That, I thought, a good observation and a good point. Thank you to Tom Sullivan for writing it up for us. Thought you might enjoy hearing it expounded for you. All right, let's see. There's more. Perhaps we can spend a moment catching up on the story mentioned the other day, but this time a take on it by Michelle Goldberg over at the New York Times about the DeSantis plans to give a perch to Chris Rufo at that college, in the liberal arts college, the state school in Sarasota, Florida, and her view of how this comes together. DeSantis allies plot the hostile takeover of a liberal college. This is an interesting way of putting it. The New College of Florida, that's the school we're talking about, has a reputation for being the most progressive public college in the state. Okay. Let's see. Gonzalez, a survivor. A survivor of the Parkland school shooting, who, perhaps you would recall her as Emma Gonzalez, and maybe, I don't know whether the X is just a name change or whether that has to do with being non-gendered now, so probably shouldn't have said her, but you may remember her as Emma Gonzalez, became a prominent gun control activist right after the shooting. Well, X recently wrote of their alma mater, and I guess that's part of the answer. That must be the pronoun of choice. They, X, must be a graduate of the New College of Florida. That's interesting. Well, they recently wrote of their alma mater, in the queer space of New College, changing your pronouns, name, or presentation, is a non-event. It's a bit of a news event for me. I didn't know about it. So, all right. I get what she means here, though. In the Princeton Review's ranking of the best public colleges and universities for making an impact, measured by things like student engagement, community service, and sustainability efforts, New College comes in third. Naturally, I mean, this is all good. So naturally, Ron DeSantis wants to destroy it, right? That's actually what she says. Naturally, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida wants to demolish it, at least as it currently exists. On Friday, he announced 6 new appointments to New College's 13-member board of trustees, including Chris Rufo, who doesn't live anywhere near there, who orchestrated the right's attack on critical race theory, and Matthew Spalding, a professor and dean at Hillsdale College, a conservative Christian school in Michigan with close ties to Donald Trump. A seventh member will soon be appointed by Florida's Board of Governors, which is full of DeSantis allies. The new majority's plan, Rufo told me, because he always tells the plan, just after his appointment was announced, is to transform New College into a public version of Hillsdale. We want to provide an alternative for conservative families in the state of Florida to say there's a public university that reflects your values. Of course, that could be the University of Florida, but apparently that's not of interest to them. The fight over the future of New College is about more than just the fate of this small school in Sarasota. For DeSantis, it's part of a broader quest to crush any hint of progressivism in public education, a quest he'd likely take national if he ever became president. For Rufo, a reconstructed New College would serve as a model for conservatives to copy all over the country. If we can take this high-risk, high-reward gambit and turn it into a victory, we're going to see conservative state legislators start to reconquer public institutions all over the United States, he said. Should he prevail, it will set the stage for an even broader assault on the academic freedom of every instructor whose worldview is at odds with the Republican Party. Rufo often talks about the, quote, long march through the institutions, a phrase coined by the German socialist Rudi Dutschke, I guess is the pronunciation of that, in 1967, but frequently attributed to the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci. Not familiar with either, but, I don't read widely in those circles. Thwarted in their hope of imminent revolution, the new left of Dutschke's generation sought instead to bore into political and cultural institutions, working within the system to change the basic assumptions of Western society. Rufo's trying, he said, to steal the strategies and the principles of the Gramscian left and then to organize a kind of counter-revolutionary response to the long march through the institutions, which never really took root. So, it's a bit of a tat with no tit, if you will. The grandiose project has several parts. Rufo has been unparalleled in fanning public education culture wars, whipping up anger first against critical race theory and then against teaching on LGBTQ issues. This year, he is turning his attention to diversity. By the way, just a pause to say, it's no wonder that his basic strategy now is, and has, I guess, always been, since he hit it big with the CRT thing, is overtly to just, if you have a problem, any problem you discover, you should basically just conflate on purpose with CRT. He's kind of a one-hit wonder, and he just says, let's just say we're playing the hits over and over again. LGBTQ issues bothering you? Call it CRT and say you got to get rid of it. I don't know how long that lasts. I think it's self-limiting in some way. I hope. Maybe it just dilutes, people lose interest, lose attention, or just start saying, I don't understand, everything is CRT. I don't know. We'll see whether it actually happens that way. Anyway, this year he is turning his attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and with his colleagues at the Manhattan Institute will soon unveil model legislation to abolish such programs at state schools. In New College, he sees a chance to create a new type of educational institution to replace those he's trying to destroy. When we spoke, he compared his plans to Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. How do you like that? Later this month, Rufo said he'll travel to New College with a, quote, landing team of board members, lawyers, consultants, and political allies. We're going to be conducting a top-down restructuring, he said, with plans to design a new core curriculum from scratch and encode in it a new academic master plan. Or rather, encode it in a new master plan. Given that Hillsdale, the template for this reimagined New College, worked closely with the Trump administration to create a, quote, patriotic education curriculum, this master plan will likely be heavy on American triumphalism. Rufo hopes to move fast, saying that the school's academic departments are going to look very different in the next 120 days. The values of the people who are already at New College are of little concern to Rufo, who, like several other new trustees, doesn't live in Florida. Speaking of current New College residents who chose it precisely for its progressive culture, Rufo said, "We're happy to work with them to make New College a great place to continue their education, or we'd be happy to work with them to help them find something that suits them better." Of course, as both leftist revolutionaries and colonialists have learned over the years, replacing one culture with another can be harder than anticipated. New college students may not go quietly. Steve Shipman, a professor of physical chemistry and president of the faculty union, points out that tenured professors are covered by a collective bargaining agreement, which makes it hard to fire them unless there's cause. People like Rufo are making statements to make impact, Shipman said, and I really don't know how viable some of those statements are on the ground. We'll soon find out. We anticipate that this is going to be a process that involves conflict, said Rufo. And we've gotten now to the end of this. We probably should have started the music earlier so that we could transition out of the way, but that's got us to the end of the article, just kind of setting up the type of conflict this is going to be and how overt Rufo is about his plans. He always is. And, I think that they can certainly make it succeed that they destroyed the place. Whether or not they can build something successful in its place remains to be seen, but I suspect that that's not really what they're interested in doing. If it's a huge flop, then fine. I mean, what happened to Barry Weiss's fake university? Nothing. It never happened. Anyway, could she be hired there? Is that the place? Will they abandon the University of Austin and just reposition themselves at the new college? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But like I said, I think they're more interested in destroying what's there than building anything in its place. If they can do that, yay, terrific, wonderful. If not, they'll just say, arg, CRT, it's so lousy. We blame them for it. All right, time to hand things over to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy team, comprised entirely at this point of Justice Putnam, who will take you through his collection of stories next, including the DeSantis culture war on U.S. history, now threatening to backfire on Florida higher education. Is that about the new college story as well? Let's find out
From
after this.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I mean, we don't know. He could be planning to destroy any number of colleges and universities in Florida. Also on the menu, the State Department launched a new program dubbed the Welcome Corps that lets private citizens sponsor refugees in the U.S. That seems like a nice idea. Let's see how well that works. That and more from around the country and around the world next. Stay tuned.